My name is Edward Hofer, and this is the Politipeeps panel. Today we're joined by Jonathan Grassmick. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, Edward.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing just fantastic. In a previous segment, we interviewed you, and you told us your take on the importance of climate science and the impact of human activity on the climate. Can you give us a short 1-minute summary of your position, please?
Yes, I think that climate change is happening. I think that there is a element of human causation in that, and we do burn fossil fuels, and that does emit carbon dioxide, which is added to the atmosphere. So I just don't think that it's a huge problem that we need to be focusing a lot of our energy on solving, particularly a lot of money and regulations by government.
Well, that's interesting. What are your credentials that you can use to back up that claim?
I have a BS in environmental science from Stephen F. Austin State University in Texas. And I've been working in the field for the last about 15 years doing ecology and wildlife habitat reclamation.
Okay, so you're saying that climate change isn't a major risk. So do you think that we should do anything at all about it?
You know, I don't think that we need to focus a lot of energy on that, because we may experience some warming, but if we do, it's probably going to be beneficial. And I'm also a big believer in the advancement of technology. So, you know, we've already seen advances in technology that have allowed us to get better gas mileage, you know, catalytic converters that allow us to pollute less. So there are a lot of things that are already happening, that happen naturally because of an advancing, robust economy that I think are going to take care of the problem. Yeah, so those are market-driven solutions rather than a lot of what is called for in government solutions.
Okay, so you're saying we shouldn't ban gasoline or coal or anything, that the economy is just going to take care of it?
I think that if we allow the economy to work instead of restricting it, as a lot of people want to do, then we're going to be in much better shape.
Okay, but couldn't maybe some government intervention speed the process up a little bit? I mean, nobody likes a dirty coal power plant.
I mean, I think that there's a place for government, but I think that it needs to be minimal. So, you know, there has been legislation in the past that has allowed for regulations like catalytic converters, like scrubbers on, you know, coal-fired plants that do reduce pollution. So I think that there are some common sense government solutions, but they need to be held in check. I think that what is being proposed by a lot of people, like the Green New Deal, is just completely crazy. You know, it'll wreck the economy, and then we'll be in a situation where people are polluting because they have to, not because, you know, they want to. I don't think anybody wants to pollute.
Okay, that's fair. So you're not in favor of outright bans, but you think that common sense regulation certainly has a place in the game.
Sure, yeah, I think that's fair.
All right. Recently, over 1 million kids were given the day off of school to go on a climate strike, and thousands of companies gave permission for their employees to do the same. How do you feel about this?
Well, as far as the companies go, I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, I wouldn't participate in it, but as far as the schools go and the kids, I think that it's a pretty reprehensible behavior, because I think what that does is it creates a situation where adults are really causing anxiety in a lot of these kids. And some of these kids have actually said as much. You know, they said that they're scared for their future. And I don't think that the science really supports them needing to be scared. And so teachers and other adults in kids' lives, for them to use kids as political pawns to make their political points, I think is pretty bad.
Do you have any children?
I do. I have 6 kids.
You have 6 kids. Wow.
Yeah.
What are their ages?
They range from 8 all the way up to 15.
So they're all in school right now. Are they in public school?
Yes, they are.
And did they participate in this climate strike? How do you feel about
the one that up here, fortunately, we only have 4 days of school. So they go to school Tuesday through Friday. And the last one occurred on a day that they did not have school. But this next upcoming one is actually tomorrow. And I know that there are teachers who have said that they will allow the kids, in the high school at least, to miss at least a portion of the school day to participate in this climate strike, is what they call it.
Well, for at least 50 years, environmental activism has used fear as one of their main drivers. Is that an effective way to promote change? And what do you think the risks and benefits are?
Well, I think fear has always been used, since the beginning of time, really. People have been using fear to control other people. So I don't think it's any surprise that it's still happening today. I think that it's just something that's natural, part of human behavior. But, we are able to evolve past our primitive minds and see those things when they're happening and, keep from doing that to our kids today.
Okay, so I'd like to read a paragraph to you from a book called Rules for Radicals. It was written in 1971 by Saul Alinsky, and it goes to this very topic.
Okay.
And he says, quote, "Remember, once you organize people around something as commonly agreed upon as pollution, then an organized people is on the move. From there, it's a short and natural step to political pollution, to Pentagon pollution," end quote. What does that quotation mean for you? What does that mean?
I think it just encapsulates the whole notion that this climate change topic has been politicized. That it is the perfect way to get people active in politics when maybe they wouldn't be before. So, and on a particular side of the political aisle. So I think that a lot of people in politics are very savvy in that the way that they present these issues and ideas to people, and they are able to mobilize people through fear this way.
Well, shouldn't people be politically active?
I don't necessarily think you should be politically active. If it doesn't interest you, if you don't want to do the homework, if you don't want to do what it takes to know the issues, then maybe you shouldn't be politically active. I'm not the kind of guy that thinks that everybody should vote. If you don't even know who the candidates are, you don't know their platforms, then maybe you shouldn't vote. Maybe you should sit home. So I know that's kind of harkens back to the aristocracy idea, and that only the people that were the educated intelligentsia of the day could vote. But I think there should be some responsibility to know the issues.
Well, today everybody can be educated, and you can even get online and study. So it sounds like you're advocating for an informed electorate. Is that what you're saying?
I am. Everybody can educate themselves, but not everybody does. So I think that you should self-select out of the voting process if you know that you're not up on the issues.
That's a hard thing to do.
It is. Yeah, and I think that's unfortunately a lot of a certain side of the political spectrum. They want to recruit people specifically that don't know the issues. That's a huge part of their get out the vote campaign, because they know that those are easy votes.
Well, this sounds very similar to something we talked about in a previous interview. You gave us a definition of science, and could you summarize for us shortly what your definition of good science is and what bad science is?
Sure. I mean, science is basically just the pursuit of knowledge, and we have developed methods to gain knowledge, and those methods are what we know now as the scientific method. So it's basically a way that we go about collecting data and determining what the truth is. So I think that we need to be rigorous in the way that we go about the scientific method and keep our personal biases out of it so that it's not corrupted.
Okay, so personal biases corrupt science, and that's what you would call bad science then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge element of bias that can creep into science, and I think it's just human nature. A lot of people look at scientists as these figures, these noble figures that cannot be corrupted, but scientists are just humans, and you can have a situation where humans allow their biases to influence their science. So there's actually a phenomenon called the noble cause corruption. And what that means is that people may get into science because they want to do good things. They may want to study climate science because they think that there's a problem and they want to develop solutions. The problem with that is if you get into that field and then determine, the science, the results of your scientific inquiry isn't what you originally thought, you may be subject to not see some of those things the way they are because you already have a preconceived notion of the way that they are.
Well, how are we supposed to control for things like that then?
There's a process called peer review that we use, and the only problem with that is that it's corruptible. And I think that there is evidence that the peer review system has been somewhat corrupted. There is another phenomenon called the replication crisis, which talks about how some of these peer-reviewed studies are not replicatable. The results, if you do the study over again, the results are not the same. And so there is a huge problem right now. There's also an issue with the people that choose to enter academia. We know that professors at colleges overwhelmingly are liberal. And I think that there have been studies that show that up to 90% of college professors contribute to Democrats, only 10% to Republicans. And so that translates to people that just get into the field, they already have a bias. And then when you have an issue like climate change that becomes political, those political biases start to trickle into their work. And so there are lots of different angles to how the science of climate can be corruptible, but it's something that we have to keep a close eye on. But if the gatekeepers are not able to do that, then private citizens like you and I have to do it.
Well, I spent 10 years in medical laboratories, and what I would hear from doctors and other laboratory specialists is that you can get any study to say anything you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not until you actually have something practical you can do with it and see a lot of replication in other studies that you can have confidence that that study was correct.
Right.
Okay. So one of the big complaints in climate activism right now is that one party is anti-science and the other one is pro-science. How would you respond to somebody saying that Republicans are anti-science and Democrats are pro-science?
I think the minute that you entertain that language, I think that you're just stepping out of the bounds of science. That is political speak, and it's a way of using science as a cudgel to beat the other side into submission. So it's a way of elevating your side above the other side by saying that we are better than you. So I think that it's a debate tactic, and it's not really. I don't think it's really useful for anything other than that.
Okay. Well, you did bring up that 90% of scientists belong to one party as opposed to the other. So is that just not relevant then?
The study that I brought up was just about talking about college professors.
Oh,
so
college professors.
Not necessarily scientists. I think that there is quite a bit of crossover in that. I do think that, and it's not that this is all scientists. The thing is that the relevant scientists are the ones that publish in peer-reviewed journals, and they're the ones that are in academia. And so a lot of times the people who choose to go into academia also have a left-wing political bias. They're predisposed to that. And people who, a scientist who doesn't have that may choose to go into business where he's a geologist for an oil company. And of course, those scientists are treated very poorly by the academic scientists because they chose a a route that is looked down upon.
Okay, that's interesting. So these peer-reviewed journals, are they more apt to publish certain types of work as opposed to other types of work? This noble bias you're talking about, does that creep into the peer review process?
Absolutely. There have been actually there was recently, and I don't know who did it, but there were a couple people who just wrote completely farcical studies and they just tried to get as many crazy woke culture references into these studies, and they tried to see what they could get published, and they were able to get some things published in peer-reviewed journals that were not accurate and that had a lot of false data in it. But because the reviewers had a particular political bent, they allowed these papers to be published when they wouldn't have otherwise.
I heard about that. I believe Dr. Bogasian and Pluckrose and Lindsay were involved with that. And
okay, yeah, that sounds
quite
familiar.
a stir.
Yeah. So I mean, and I think that is something that happens throughout academia. So not just in the vein that they were publishing those studies.
Okay. Well, they say that 97% of scientists agree that climate change is a serious threat and a problem. So do you think that this 97% just creates this big noble bias and it's a conspiracy and maybe we need to get out the tinfoil hats or something?
Well, I think that the 97% figure is problematic in and of itself. I don't know how you come to that number. I mean, did they send out a survey? I don't know how they came to that. So I think that what they did was they looked at different peer-reviewed studies, and they themselves, the ones that were conducting that study to come up with the 97%, they evaluated those papers and they attributed the authors of those papers to a particular view.
They sent out a study. You don't think they sent out a survey and actually asked all these scientists? You think they just assumed what these scientists were saying?
I mean, if you send out a survey, what would you ask? It's not, climate change is not a yes or no answer. Do you believe in climate change? It's not a yes or no answer. I believe in climate change, but there are other
97% then.
I guess I could be part of the 97%. That's true. But if you drill down on these scientists in the 97%, you may find out that they believe that climate change exists, maybe because it always exists. Maybe they believe it'll be good. You don't know all the different questions that they may have, or the different answers they may have to those questions. I think I lost you.
I think Edward froze.
Oh.
Edward, you're frozen.
Yeah. I've got a strong connection to my router, so I think. But you guys are frozen up again on my end.
I think you're back now.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. I don't know what that was.
Just back up and redo it. That's fine.
Okay.
I like the part where you said that I was part of the 97%.
Well, technically you are.
Yeah.
You believe that climate change is happening. I think that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
So what question did I ask? Where were we at? Let's see.
Why don't you just do the 97% again? And
okay.
I did put something in chat. I don't know if you want to include it or not. Oh, you froze again, Edward. Edward, can you hear me?
Huh.
Yeah,
I think Comcast might be giving me some trouble here.
Okay. Do you want to try closing Zoom and reopening it, see if that helps, or?
Yeah. I'll close it out and reboot it. I don't think it's my computer, but I'll do that. My connection seems really strong. It might just be my local.
All right, hang on. All right, so don't do it. Let's try it again.
Okay.
Don't reboot.
Okay.
Just ask the question again.
97%, and then go to the survey question that you dropped into chat.
You don't have to, but here's my thinking is that if you don't, how do you say it? If you don't kiss the ring of climate change and you're a scientist, you're out of work, in my opinion. So if they were to send out such a survey, would you be hurting your career by answering it contrary to the way 97% of people answer it?
Right. That's absolutely a factor, I believe.
Okay, we'll go with that then. I'll jump back in with the 97%. So they say 97% of scientists agree that climate change is a serious problem. Is this just some big giant conspiracy then?
I would question how they came to that number, 97%. I mean, it's not a simple yes or no answer. It's not, do you believe in climate change? Yes or no. Like I said earlier, there's a spectrum, between the two different definitions of climate change. Yes, I believe in climate change, as in the climate always changes, and maybe there's a little bit of benefit that will happen from some modest warming, all the way to the other end where it says, yeah, climate change is happening, and it's going to be catastrophic, and we need to raise our taxes and have government regulate business, and we need to pass the Green New Deal and all this crazy stuff. Where on the spectrum did the people who conducted this study to get this number, where is that line? So I don't think it's quite that simple. I mean, I believe in climate change. Am I part of the 97%?
Well, did you get a survey?
I didn't get a survey.
So maybe, well, if they didn't send out a survey, then how did they get this 97% number?
What they did was they looked at different studies, and they basically attributed, I think, their own biases to these studies that they read. So they, if a conclusion of a study said that there was, that the temperatures had risen since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, they put that study in the camp of, climate change. But to a lot of people, that means catastrophic climate change. They could have just been, presenting the data as they saw it, and they didn't have propose any solutions, or even thought that solutions need to be proposed. So I think that the whole 97% figure is just disingenuous on its face.
So you easily could have been shoehorned into the 97%. They might be
easily, yeah. If I would have been sent a survey, I could have been, put in that 97%.
Well, let's say that a survey were sent out. Do you think that there would be some suppression of people's answers? Would that impact their careers if they answered incorrectly?
I don't want to say that it definitely would have, but I think that the fear is there. I think that there are certainly scientists who have been impacted. I forget the guy's name. There's a guy Dr. Ridd in Australia. I think the James Cook University. He went through a terrible ordeal because he did not toe the climate change line. And I think that there are other examples of that where there could be fear in the scientific community among people who are skeptical. And if you don't have tenure, even in some cases when you do have tenure, your career could be over. So I think that definitely is a factor.
The Green New Deal has an ambitious goal of 100% renewable energy in 10 years. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think that's an extremely ambitious goal, but unfortunately, it's just not very practical. What a lot of people don't realize about energy sources like wind and solar is that it's very energy diffuse. It's not compact energy like you get with fossil fuels. So you need a lot of land area in order to get the same amount of energy from wind and solar as you would from coal or oil. So you're really, if you want to talk about environmentalists and caring about the environment, then you need to look at the impacts of some of these renewables like wind and solar, because they're going to impact the environment a lot more than people think they will. And there are also aspects like having to mine rare earth metals for solar panels. You talk about these wind turbines that are really high up in the air, and the maintenance on them is difficult. They increase the cost of energy. So, just to say, throw out there, yeah, we need to be 100% renewables in 10 years. I think that's just completely unrealistic.
Well, nuclear power is pretty compact. What about that?
I think I'm a huge proponent of nuclear. I think that that is the way to go, because whether you believe that climate change is a huge problem or whether you don't, I think that nuclear can bridge the gap between those two opinions, because I'd like nuclear because I think that eventually it would be a very inexpensive form of energy, and I think that it would help bring a lot more people out of poverty. I also think that it is cleaner. I mean, even when you're talking about CO2 not being a pollutant, CO2 is a plant food. Well, when you burn coal, you still do produce other things, carbon monoxide. You still produce sulfur. So even though I don't believe that CO2 is a huge problem for the climate, I don't want there to be these dirty forms of energy. So I'm a proponent of nuclear.
Okay, well, but isn't nuclear kind of dangerous? Aren't there risks of meltdowns and national catastrophes and even global catastrophes with nuclear power?
I think that the danger from nuclear has been wildly overblown. There have been a few disasters in history. There've been Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima. But when you look at all those disasters, relatively few people were killed in those. So you compare that to the amount of people who have died because of lung issues, from burning coal or from smog and other things like that, from burning fossil fuels. I think that there's a huge benefit to nuclear, even with those disasters. But you also look at a country like France, who has produces a lot of their energy from nuclear, and there hasn't been a problem there. There hasn't been a disaster. So I think that as technology advances, we get better at doing things. There's a lot less of a likelihood that there's going to be disasters in the future.
Okay, if we're not going to ban things, what steps should we take to protect the environment and the ecology? I mean, are you concerned about the kind of planet we're going to leave our children?
I am actually an optimist when it comes to this. I think I see advances in technology, and I see the things that the market has given us, and I think that we're in for a much better world coming up. In my lifetime, it's gotten a lot better. You talk about the poverty rate around the world. In the 80s, we were constantly seeing famines in Ethiopia, and we were having all kinds of issues that we don't have today, or they're not nearly as severe. So in my kid's lifetime, I only expect it to get better. I mean, if you look back 100 years ago, and you think back to 1919, and what we know of society back then, there were cars, but not very many people could afford them. You had a much more higher likelihood of dying of a disease. Women died in childbirth a lot more often. So think back to 100 years ago and how far we've come since then, and try to think to 100 years from now and where we'll be at that point. And I think that technology will solve all of the problems that people want government to step in and solve for us.
Well, that certainly is very optimistic. Is there anything else that you'd like to add at the end here?
Yeah, sure. I think I just wanted to send out a message to some of the young people who are participating in these climate change protests. I know there was one last year, and they're planning on having another one soon. I would just say, don't let the adults in your life cause you to be fearful. You really need to do your own research and look at the other side of things. If your teacher tells you something at school that doesn't quite sit right, go look at the other side. I mean, you have the whole internet at your disposal. You can look up, you can Google something so quickly. Be skeptical. Don't take everything at face value. If you are a big believer in climate change catastrophe, look at some people on the other side of the argument. Look up a lecture by Judith Curry, or maybe something by Willie Soon. Read Enlightenment Now by Steve Pinker. He has a lot of reason for optimism for the future. And he's actually a believer in climate change. He believes that it is a problem, but he also believes that technology is the answer. So, do some of these things and don't let fear rule your life and your decision-making process. So I think that's kind of what I want to say to wrap up.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions for you or wants to know more, how can they find you online?
Yeah, you can find me just by searching my name, Jonathan Grassmick, on Facebook, or find me on Twitter. I'm just now getting into the Twitter universe, so I don't have a lot there, but look me up and see what we can come up with together.
All right, and I'm Edward with PolitiPeeps. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and ring the bell to get future notifications.